Thanks everyone for logging on tonight. This is our first Philadelphia Emerging Architects Committee event of the year. So I'd like to introduce myself. Ross Silverman, I'm one of the co-directors, and Michael Penzel is my other co-director. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Tonight, we will be welcoming Lauren Thomsen Design, the 2021 PEA Prize winning firm. The PEA Prize winning firm is awarded to an architecture firm every year that shows good design and thinking working in the Philadelphia region. Lauren and her firm stood out as a forerunner immediately due to their high design thinking and their consciousness of impact to both environment and context. And without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Lauren.
Thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. I want to start by saying thank you to AIA Philadelphia for the award. We're so honored. And also to PEA for having us tonight to speak. I'm hoping we can have a good Q&A session after. I was asked to select a topic to present on, and I chose the row house not only because they make up a significant portion of our work at the firm, but also because I've always been fascinated by the kind of the magic of the idea of the home as both a physical and cultural construct, but also something that's completely unique and personal. And I think we're in a pivotal moment in the history of the notion of the home, where we're asking more of them as we kind of have an increasingly virtual existence, and we'll probably continue to do so at an accelerated pace. But also, we're at a precipice with climate change, and we'll no doubt experience kind of immense changes in the next century due to that. So this is LTD. The firm was founded in 2017, and we are Center City based. We are at a storefront at 15th and Lombard that you can see in the second image. And right now we're a team of 4. We have Jakaya, who is working part-time as she finishes her degree at Jefferson. We have Ben, who is a former student of mine and has been working for a few years and is invaluable. And Matt Gindelsberger, who is a longtime friend and colleague and a registered architect and certified passive house consultant. And we work in Philadelphia. We love Philadelphia. And it's not surprising that so much of our work is row houses, given that Philadelphia is a city of homes. And what I mean by that is specifically, Philadelphia is a city of single attached dwelling units. So over 70% or approximately 70% of dwelling units, according to the Washington Post in 2015, 70% of dwelling units in Philadelphia are single attached dwelling units, which is far exceeds that of any other major city in the United States, with the second only being Baltimore. And it's likely due to the moment in which these cities really grew and their urban fabric really was constructed. And so these are a few of our projects. This is our work. It's narrow. And we wanted to kind of create this compilation because we wanted to show that despite the fact that it's very narrow and kind of similarly proportioned in both plan and elevation, there's a lot of diversity. And this is obviously similar for Philadelphia as a whole, right? And so here are the corresponding plans, and you can see there's really, there's a huge amount of difference, despite the fact that these are probably like largely within 16 and 20 feet wide and have no windows on two sides. And then here are, oh boy, this is a heavy slide. Images of these corresponding projects in various stages of completion. Some of these are rendering, some of these projects are completed. So we're kind of extremely fascinated by the fact that we inhabit space completely differently than our predecessors, and yet we are still bound to the same spatial and material framework. So on the left, we have row homes on South 24th Street in 1895. In the middle, we've got row homes on South Bainbridge Street in 2022. Is it safe to assume that the urban fabric will look very similar in 2149? Probably, you know, it probably will look pretty similar. So big questions are, why hasn't the housing stock changed more over time? And then also, of course, how could it be better? That's our job. So we boiled it down to 4 constants that have made and will continue to make the row house a resilient housing typology. The first is materials and construction, pretty obvious. The second is the benefits of density. The third is the power of speculation. And the fourth is democratic ideals. And I should say, you know, I'm not an architectural historian. I'm not an expert on Philadelphia. There's a ton of incredible research out there. And so this is really kind of touching the surface, but it's something that if you want to practice in this context, you really need to do the due diligence and understand the history of how it came about, and the values that brought it about, and imagine how it might evolve. So the first of these points is material and construction. On the left is an example of Marshall's Court, which I think is dated to 1710, I think. It's a very early typology. It's called the London House. The point is, you can see it's a repeatable construction. It was based on material limits. It was meant to be efficient in a block, and something that could be done by many, many builders. On the right is a contemporary project of ours, and those values still hold true today. We're building efficiently. I don't want to say low tech, but you know, with kind of typical building materials. We're using space according to the plots that were established long ago. And the only real difference is that we're no longer using masonry for party walls. We're now using wood. And it'll be fascinating to see if our contemporary versions of row homes last also, you know, 150 or 200 years as well. Second point is the benefit of density. Density was a requirement initially during the time when row homes were really developed at the end of the 19th century. If everybody could mute themselves, I'd be grateful. And so here we see Rose Hill Street in North Kensington, and in the very distance you can see the Carruth and Endurance Mills. So the walkability from work to home was seen as a huge benefit. And also it should be noted that the fact that this workers' housing was created was seen as a vast improvement from tenement housing in New York City, where you had multiple families per building. Throughout history, the urban density has been rethought. At Penn's Landing, Sauer rethought density in a way that was less uniform than the typical row, but equally as high or more dense than typical. And, you know, there have been many other architects that have also rethought the row. The benefits of density still remain today. Of course, living in a walkable city is healthy, it's wonderful. It also really adds to community. Like, and on the right, you see a block party. The third point is the power of speculation. And this is really fascinating. Philadelphia, as it was planned by William Penn and Thomas Home in 1683, was going to be a green country town. Obviously, something went awry. And quickly, it became apparent that the land had such value that it could be subdivided and built upon in a much denser manner that would really allow for rapid urbanization. So on the left is Carstairs Row, is one of the first row houses known in Philadelphia. And as you can see, this is the first time it's elevated as multi-dwelling units in one drawing and one plan. And ultimately, it became the builders and the landowners who really controlled the density of the development in Philadelphia rather than the city planners, which is super fascinating because that still holds true today. And that doesn't, I don't want that to come off as a negative thing at all. I think it's really important to realize that development is a good and positive and required thing in the city. And here's an example of really kind of positive development. It's Thin Flats by Onion Flats in 2009. It's a LEED Platinum building, you know, which would very much promoted density and living, and in which Onion Flats also was the landowner and the developer, as well as the designer. The fourth point, which makes the row house resilient, is democratic ideals. And so the row was originally designed as to be modest and efficient, not an opulent, you know, use of land or money, and known as the fabric of freedom, the physical fabric of freedom, made of bricks. I attached this image of Asher Benjamin's Builder's Companion because this was utilized by builders to build rows and rows and rows of buildings efficiently. These weren't meant to be unique homes. They weren't meant to be designed over time with an architect and a builder. They were meant to be delivered quickly, safely, efficiently during a housing boom. And since those ideals have been set in place, Philadelphians have understood the value of them and established protective frameworks that maintain them. And here's a copy of the first zoning ordinance that was issued in 1933, which quite obviously limits the pattern of development in the city. And I think, you know, nowadays we see that the density or the row really, it also kind of affords us communal pride. You know, you see neighborhood gatherings, you see kind of neighborhood identity. Here's the stoop phenomena. It's almost like you are an individual among many, and there is strength there. That's kind of undeniable. So what we see are is that it's incredible that we have this urban fabric, which is resilient and durable and lasting both physically and conceptually. But the reality of that is you have old buildings. We are dealing with an aging building stock. And from the outside, it may appear or to those who are not kind of immediately involved in the process of maintaining that building stock, it may appear that buildings require renovation or that work needs to be done. But, you know, sometimes you step inside the building and it's apparent that there's nothing that could save the structure, right? That old buildings need repair, and this should be understood as a real challenge for Philadelphia. According to the city paper recently, there are 17 to 20,000 vacant or abandoned property row homes in Philadelphia, which is a huge number. According to the Healthy Row House, 75% of row houses are over 50 years old. There are many seniors who live in them, many renters who live in them, and many owners have low incomes. And so the city has established home improvement programs for the row and to do more, but it's really like this is a major challenge for Philadelphia that needs to be understood. And I want to kind of contextualize our work in that. There are many social, economic, practical, and sustainable reasons to improve upon the existing. And whenever possible in our work, we renovate. But it can be very messy. It requires a kind of a nimble attitude toward changes that happen under construction. And I don't forcibly mean technical changes, but also changes that the client, the contractor, engineers, every party needs to be able to navigate from a contractual, a cost, a duration of the project lens. And so it is challenging to renovate, I guess that's what I'm saying. And in these homes, it's pretty incredible. Often you see many eras of construction. Imagine what these homes have seen, and if the walls could speak, what would they say? And those eras of construction can pose technical challenges. Here we're looking directly up through about 12 different eras of framing that have been just hacked, and this was all exposed once we had the walls open after design. Just gonna clear those guys. So importantly, I think we have to understand that preservation for preservation's sake is simply not realistic. And it's not going to allow Philadelphia's aging building stock to evolve as it needs to. On the other side, unbridled speculative development is equally dangerous, and we should acknowledge that Philadelphia's urban fabric has an incredible value. And we operate in this realm, and so we've been very interested in kind of seeing this discourse kind of happen around us. I think it's certainly, there are cases in which we must preserve, there are cases in which we should develop, and the most important thing which we think is that you really cannot be dogmatic about this. It's not a one size fits all kind of solution. We think you really have to be deliberate and kind of understand it as a unique proposition, each project. So now, more than ever, our houses need to perform, as I was mentioning earlier. So an obvious evolutionary requirement is programmatic adaptation. And I'm going to just roll through a couple of our projects in which we've done this. And that we find that adaptation is most successful and paired with additional, specifically for the row, additional daylight, fresh air, exterior living spaces, and also access to nature. So this is a project example, which was really not a huge project. The only impact we had on the exterior was to add this bank of skylights to provide daylight to what was previously just a loft, kind of an unused loft, and what we turned into a new primary suite. We added a glass wall for acoustic isolation and really kind of updated the performance of the house in that way. Here we have what was a really dark and cramped interior, which is probably the case for many, many of these rows. You know, that no one's updating. And then we had the opportunity to really kind of increase the daylight, increase the connection to the exterior, had a great yard, and change it for the better. Often we'll get asked to simply add exterior space, and the roof is an opportune place to do that. We'll also get asked to add a story to a building. And in this case, because we sought a variance for the project, the neighborhood association actually required us to do a mansard, required us to do 2 dormers. So it's kind of fascinating. There are moments in which, you know, you're kind of designing by, you know, by regulation effectively in many ways in the city, more than in outlying, you know, counties or towns. And that isn't forcibly a negative thing. It's an important curtail, but it also, we don't see it as limiting. We should be able to work within the bounds of you know, what's acceptable. This is another example. This is a historic row, and we were not allowed to do any modifications to the front of the building. And in the rear, the modifications were limited to what you couldn't see from a transverse street. And so here we added program and kind of character to the building solely in the rear in order to maintain the historic presence in the front. Sometimes you get lucky enough to be able to combine 2 row homes and have a wider footprint. In this case, again, it was in a historic district, and so we were asked to maintain the urban fabric. So you can see that it almost appears to be 2 houses, and this was something that was sought by the Historic Commission, and it's actually the door on the right is a dummy door, which maintains the rhythm of the street. But behind that door, we were able to completely open up the floor plan and make a really nice and well-lit, beautiful open space. We also added a roof deck, which was not allowed to be visible from the street, but added so much useful value for the clients and program up here. And this is just, it's very typical of the requests that we get, you know, for additional program, additional added light, more efficient systems, etc. So the next kind of evolutionary requirement we see is that of energy efficiency. ultimately, we think energy independence. And Philadelphia is slow to adapt from a code standpoint, I should say. But also, we love our, the urban fabric. We love the row. And change is scary, especially when it's in your backyard. We've had the incredible opportunity to be involved in a passive house project in Northern Liberties. It's just north of Orkney Park. And we have been involved in the design, from the planning through approvals process, the architecture, interiors. Matt is the passive house consultant on the project, and we're working with an awesome builder who's not only super passionate about passive house, but also, really just technically skilled. So the project steps back off the park to allow for, to make it so that the park isn't facing just an enormous party wall. It's a small building. It's about 1,850 square feet. It's equipped now, or this is a new construction project, I should say. It's on a vacant lot, and not every project can be that way, but it's equipped with, an airtight envelope that's well insulated, with high performance windows and high efficiency equipment. And ultimately it'll have a PV array on it, which will offset all of the energy used. Here's an image of the building. And here's the building under construction. But as I was saying earlier, we really need to work with not just in a new construction scenario, but we need to figure out how to upgrade our existing building stock. And this is a project we're working on in Queen Village, in which it's a deep energy retrofit of an existing row, and we're adding program as well as outdoor living space on the roof, hopefully on-site energy generation, and really making it more livable from a program standpoint, from a spatial standpoint, from that we're providing lasting envelope and building systems, and also equipping the clients with a home that they really love, and we're part of the process designing. So in conclusion, I think, what we see is that, we really need to kind of push the boundaries of what we can do with the row, because it will continue to adapt. And this is the typology and the fabric that we're operating in, and it's worth updating and saving and kind of worth surmounting all the complexities of doing that. And I will say, like, since starting the practice, it's been incredible to see the amount of designers and contractors who in the area who are doing that and who are dedicated to do that. But that is certainly our charge, and we have faith that it will happen. I think that's it.
Thanks so much, Lauren. We'd like to open up the floor to anyone on the call for any questions or comments or any discussions we'd like to have about the topics we discussed tonight.
Hey, Lauren, I'll jump in first. First off, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I think the common row house is easily overlooked, but once you start unpacking it, like you did tonight, there's so many levels of complexity. I just want to ask you about the passive house retrofit, or even if that the one in Queen Village, the final project you were talking about, even if that isn't full passive house, can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges with trying to fit that new low energy style into an existing, multi-mass produced housing stock?
Sure. I mean, I think it's largely a challenge of the exterior assemblies, right? We're maintaining the existing framing, the masonry exterior walls, and we're losing space building inboard of them to make it airtight and well insulated. And so convincing clients that it's worth it to do that, right? Which we have to do to some degree, but also we're losing a couple extra inches for air sealing. And convincing clients that it's worth it to do that, and also getting the contractors on board that it's worth it to do these upgrades. That's certainly a challenge. I think that in my mind is, the technical challenges are not that difficult ultimately. It's the difficulty of getting the team on board and making sure that you have everyone working toward a common goal, I think is kind of the big picture for me. Do you have the same experience?
For me, I haven't done a passive house project like that, but my experience is one of the biggest difficulties is getting the contractor on board. So it sounds like you're working with some really good folks, but I get a lot of, especially with supply chain issues, what I'm seeing in the market is we can't get X, let's use Y. And the two are nowhere near equal. Obviously, you can't substitute products like that.
Right, totally.
But yeah, that's an excellent point, right? You're building all the insulation, all the air sealing inboard, you're losing space in an already constrained envelope.
Yeah, and every inch counts in this environment, so.
Hi, Lauren. I have a question. And thank you so much for this very refreshing lecture, actually. I wanted to ask about one of your earlier slides where you compared the row houses from the, I forget, 18th century, I think, and the 20th century. And you're right, and they're very similar. Of course, lately some changes have been introduced, but so much of our lifestyle has changed, right? The introduction of the automobile, so many cars on the streets, the internet, us working from home, and yet the row house has not changed much. And you were touching on the program towards the end of your lecture, and I was wondering, what are those changes that could be done to the row house? Is it in plan? Is it in elevation? How can today's row house accommodate our current lifestyle?
Right. I don't know that there's one prescriptive answer to that question. I'm going to go back to this slide if I can. Actually, I'll just X out of this screen. Let me just go into, I think to answer that, it's more about, often it's a question of that's specific to the client, because I don't mean to dodge the answer, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that each is a unique project, right? Very often we have dark, cramped spaces, low ceiling heights, no basement. We have no garage, which not often do we change, but and little outdoor space. That's kind of the existing condition that we're dealing with. that cold, drafty. And so, you know, often those are kind of baseline improvements that we're going to be making in a project is, you know, opening it up, using the two facades that do get good daylight as much as possible to flood the interiors, using the roof as a fifth facade, and you know, just kind of doing our best, making the basement more utilizable, often going lower with the slab level, and using every inch as efficiently as possible. But I would say we do try and like tease out of clients what they really want, because it's important to acknowledge that it's really unique.
Mhm.
Lauren, do you have any suggestions? I think you really hit on an interesting point there about teasing out the priorities of the client. It seems to be that people have a very limited envelope with the row house, and everybody wants to fit everything in there. But it's just not, it's not practical.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you simply have to prioritize or get a variance, you know.
Yeah, right.
Hey, Lauren, if I could jump in here. You had mentioned something earlier in your presentation about how the typical row house stock in Philadelphia is very old and requires a lot of investment just to keep it a safe and habitable structure for the next decades or hopefully a couple hundred years. Are you involved in any conversations or like policy driven decisions on a more citywide level that is around either funding or resources that allow owners of row homes to make those types of improvements, or even educational resources? Like I kind of see that as a vital step to keep the row houses that we have usable for the next foreseeable future.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I am not super involved in policy. There are some incredible organizations that are doing exactly what you mentioned, like the Healthy Row House Project, Green Building United. You know, I think the AIA to a certain degree. There are, you know, the AIA is active in policy making. I think there is a certain degree like of implementation, and I didn't say that at the end of the presentation, but I often think that in order to really adopt, you know, energy efficiency measures, it's gonna take an evolution of the building code. You know, it's just that's what it will be, or that, or an economic gain for, you know, and I don't think the economic gain is coming anytime soon, because ultimately you're adding material to the building to make it more efficient. So I am not actively part of policy making. I would love to get more involved, and certainly researching for this presentation, I got very excited to learn about all of the people who are doing incredible work in the city. But just being totally honest, I'm not that involved yet.
So I feel like I'm talking too much. I'm sorry, but I just want to jump on that comment. I'm on the board as the director of advocacy for AIA, and this is one of the things that we are very interested in. This idea of adaptive reuse and preserving the fabric of the neighborhoods are extremely important to us. So if anyone is interested in that, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Just shoot me a message and we'll get you looped into the conversations.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, I have a question. You know, I think with the conversation we're having with this firm, with LTD, I love the fact that it's talking about sort of intimate design. You're sort of designing for the client on a, dare I say, human scale, as opposed to a mass production scale, like what we're seeing now in the city. And so this is a topic that runs very parallel with my upbringing. It no longer looks like what it used to, because it's gentrified now. And so I'm curious to see where the firm stands in terms of the sort of gentrified era that we're living in.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important question. It is mind-blowing to see the amount of development that's happening in some areas. And we've done projects in areas that are really rapidly changing. In many ways, I think it's hard to say it's gentrification, because you don't know, you can't make the assumption of who will move in. In many ways, you're investing in your own neighborhood. The people we work with live in these neighborhoods, and they're investing in their own neighborhood to improve the urban fabric of the neighborhood. And that's the way I like to think about it, is, we're improving the urban fabric of Philadelphia. If it's a vacant lot and there's a new house, it's better than a vacant lot. It is a difficult question, the price point of a new house versus, a new 3-family house or a new 2-family house. And we've been on zoning meetings and had really important and interesting discussions. And I'm thinking of specifically Brewerytown, Sharswood, where the neighborhood is just blanket opposed to any multifamily development. And you can understand why, because the neighborhood has changed so immensely. But I think, there are structures in place that curtail that, hopefully, right? The neighborhoods have been put, zoning laws are in place. But I always try and believe that, ultimately what we're doing is improving on the urban fabric, and improving Philadelphia. And as long as we're delivering a really quality building, it's that fits contextually within the fabric, right? That's not an enormous kind of, ostentatious thing, then like kind of ethically, it seems acceptable. It's a really challenging and real question. And if you're interested in learning more about it, I would say sit on community meetings, because you'll hear both sides of an argument, and they're free and open to the public, and you can actually have a voice there. And it's a really fascinating and educational experience.
Yeah, thank you. I bring it up as a topic because I also have to write a paper about it now in my classes, and it's a Rogerian argument. So we have to look at both sides and kind of not pick one, but just kind of evaluate what's going on. So thank you for your input.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. So I think like one of the bigger problems with the work that we're trying to do is demolition by neglect, because it'll really limit, what you can accomplish in the first place with these kind of projects. So I guess my question is really two-part. One, how big of an issue is it with this kind of work? And two, is there really anything that we can do about it aside from, putting fines on people?
I don't know on a citywide scale how big of I had the statistic that, there are 17 to 20,000 row houses that are either vacant or blighted or so in neglect, which is pretty mind blowing. You know, if you think if there are 22 houses per block, and you got 20,000 houses. I don't, you know, on a citywide scale, can we repurchase them? Can we, you know, I think there's the PHDC, which is working toward, you know, bettering that exact condition. But like I was saying in the one slide where I showed her, you're still outside. Sometimes the houses are too far gone and it's not safe and there's too much liability and the cost is simply not worth it to save it, right? You're saving you know, the bricks on the front facade and that's it. And so I think it's really, you know, you can't simply say save it all. I think the better thing to do would almost be just to focus on one is like an identification system, and then of the degree of blight, right? Is it savable? Is it not? And I'm sure they have this in place. I'm just not like a policy expert. And two would be to reinforce the import of context, you know, kind of understanding context in design. And that doesn't mean imitating what's there, right?
Mhm.
It's super important. You know, even the Historic Commission doesn't recommend imitating. You can complement without imitating. And that's, so I think, you know, instead of simply saying, let's save, you know, everything that's been neglected, I think kind of evaluating that and implementing good design, either to rehabilitate it or to be put in place, you know, to solve the housing crisis that Philadelphia's in. There's a dearth of housing units, and we're in a housing boom, and we're still short. And you know, so it's like all of the resources are there. We just have to act on it, and it's interesting that we're talking about policy so much, because it's just that it really is kind of a big picture issue that we're dealing with.
Hey, Lauren, can I ask one question, please?
Sure.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I just want to ask, do you think in 100 years, it's going to be Philadelphia will have, it'll be a city of passive row houses? Like, is that what you're headed for?
That's a good question. That's a tough question. I think that, you know, passive house may not be the standard, but you know, but I think that houses will be probably energy independent in 100 years. You know, that we'll understand energy in a completely different way, and an energetic grid, and you know, the idea of using fossil fuels in your home, I personally believe is going to be like, oh yeah, it's like gas lights, right? It's going to be something of the past. And so I think that the moving toward the efficiency of the envelope, as well as an efficiency of the systems that heat and cool your house and make it comfortable, will ultimately allow us to be energetically independent. And I think the driving force there is probably going to be regulation as a result of like increased awareness of climate change and acuity of the problem, of the crisis. You know, it's like it's going to start going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and building codes are going to try and respond and have to respond. But I think that's the only thing that's gonna just kind of mandate sea change. And hopefully it will sooner rather than later. You know, I wish we could just walk in and convince every client to do a wonderful passive row house. They would last 100 years and we would fill the city with them. But I think it would be, you know, like I don't think you can imagine it'll be that easy of an evolution. I hope so, is the answer.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. So you had proposed or shown one of your projects that took two of these row homes and combined them together into a singular unit. And I was wondering how plausible, as you talk about the housing issues in Philadelphia, you would see it being to start to combine 2 or 3 of these row homes, and then rather than turn them into a single unit, but to take them and then break them down into smaller components and make it like a more affordable, take 2 row home units and then turn that into 6 affordable units for people that can't afford necessarily the full size. I'm wondering how plausible you see that becoming.
I think that's an awesome idea. And you know, it's not straightforward, but I think it's an awesome idea, you know, to use existing building stock and adapt it to the needs of, you know, the population. I think, let's do it.
So do you think a neighborhood would be more open to that idea rather than, say, the construction of a new multifamily building or a new 6-unit building?
Rather than new, I would imagine so, but it varies so much neighborhood to neighborhood. Like I was saying earlier to, I think it was Victor, you know, some neighborhoods are, you know, more opposed to multifamily development and density that's associated with that. But I think, you know, there's often you'll have a single family home constructed in lieu of multifamily, which the units in a multifamily home might be more affordable ultimately than a new single family home. So it's a matter of presenting the argument properly and getting the associated parties on board. But as a solution to too few housing units, I think it's an awesome idea that you see probably implemented around town, you know.
Just not in my neighborhood. I think that's what most people say.
Right, not in my backyard.
Yes, not in my backyard.
Well,
you very
Lauren,
much.
to add to that, I live in the Shardswood Brewery Town area, and I was on a kind of neighborhood zoning-esque meeting a couple months back. There was a lot of discussion about the idea of renting versus owning and how that changes a neighborhood or even a street. And, you know, you mentioned things like that are educational. I never, as a renter personally, I never took stock into what that does to the larger picture, but there were a lot of people adamant that with fewer and fewer homeowners, what does that really do to the pride of a street or a neighborhood?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And there are a lot of people who have been on their block and their home for decades and are really passionate about it. And it's really important that we listen, you know, and respond. And that doesn't forcibly output the best ROI, you know. And so there's always going to be that tension. And I think it's, you know, that's kind of why I say it's really a project by project basis. And you kind of have to stay nimble and not attached to any sort of ideal or dogma. You know, you say, here we are, this is the project, this is the block, this is the context, you know, what are we dealing with? And that's what we do. Every project is different. Every project is so different, and it's incredible.
I do have a question for the group, and I don't know if anybody remember this. So I think it was in the Nutter's administration that they had done a report, I think might have been with PHA, that a lot of the row house was abandoned because people don't want to pay taxes on it. So they just left it. So the city was going to find those and demo them and rehab them for low-income housing. But I don't know whatever happened to that program. Anybody recall that?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
So a few years back, I believe back in the Nutter's administration, there was a program. Well, like I said, they've done a study. They found out a lot of row houses was being abandoned because people either move out and they didn't want to pay the taxes. They just left the houses abandoned and they got deteriorated. So the city was going to go find those units, demo them, and then rehab them as low-income housing. It was a program that was, I think, teamed with PHA, the Philadelphia Housing Authority. I don't know whatever happened to that program or if anybody recall that program. I mean, it's got to be, 10, 15 years ago in another administration.
I'm not familiar with that specific program, but there is the Redevelopment Authority. And this has nothing to do with affordable housing, but and the land bank, which I think they are now all under the umbrella of the PHCA, the house, it's escaping me. But the, I think there are certainly programs active right now to buy back blighted houses. I just don't know whether they're still associated with affordable housing.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Anybody else?
I think that I do remember there was a point in time when I think what mostly resulted in that was a lot of buildings were demolished and little post and rail fences were put up on those lots, and they mostly became vacant lots that were sometimes controversial because they were collecting trash and they weren't maintained even as vacant lots. That's what I recall. I don't think it was, in the end, I don't think a very successful program, but that seems to be how it was. I did have a question for you, Lauren, as well. I was wondering if you could talk about what kind of advice you give to potential clients who have very limited budgets, but they still want to make their homes more energy efficient and kind of try to deal with climate change.
Right. It's a toughie because money is just real. I mean, it's really unfortunate, and this is, it's a constant reality we're dealing with, is the kind of the negotiation between the ideal of what we want and what the clients want, and also the budget and the reality of it. So I think, small measures that we'll recommend are windows and air sealing. Just to be very literal, that can make a huge impact without having to rip up the walls, open the walls. Better HVAC systems, and more energy efficient appliances. If there's more budget, then you can start thinking about air sealing and exterior insulation. But it's, in my experience, projects get very big very quick. Once you start touching one thing, it becomes extremely difficult. We joke about it as the onion. It just starts to be layers of the onion, and it comes, and eventually you're just gutting the place, and that is a huge challenge for us in the office. And also oftentimes that happens during construction, not even during the design process, where you haven't intended a very small renovation, kind of surgical, you know, in order, you know, and ultimately something's exposed, something was unexpected or found or different than what you had anticipated. And it ends up being a much larger project. And that is one of the realities of, you know, this existing, dealing with these existing buildings. But I think new windows that are better sealed, you know, like my personal experience, it just goes such a long way. More efficient lighting, more efficient appliances, you know, like the row house is so naturally efficient that, you know, being kind of insulated on two sides and warm and small, you know, in footprint, that you know, it's hard to really bring it down without kind of opening up the walls. But there are certainly those kind of discrete measures that we could recommend. It would be really fun to make a or maybe useful to make a list of, you know, small measures that you can take to make. I'm sure someone's done it. I'm sure a lot of people have done it, but it would be nice to make it widely available to Philadelphians, right?
And
Or
some of the
find-
utility companies
find it and
have that in their
distribute it.
bills. Yeah, some of the utility companies I think have that in their bills, in that paper, maybe at
Mhm.
least a little bit.
Yeah, but even just to have it like holistically focused around the row, which actually I shouldn't say, there is the passive row house manual, which was just created, which is an incredible resource. But you know, if you're talking about smaller, more discrete things, it'd be nice to have just a resource available for you know, typical homeowners who aren't ready to do a large renovation.
So I have a business related question for you, though, Lauren. I do have the benefit of renovating my own row house in 06. And I was meant to tear down 2 walls. And next thing I know, I gutted the whole house and really fill out everything. And yeah. So as on the business side, you know, when you have a client, let's say if I was the client, you know, want to do 2 walls, the next thing I know, you know, how do you adjust your fee when you're peeling the onion out and finding out?
Right. It's incredible. And that I think I mentioned that at one point. It's really, that is a challenge. What we do is we prepare people for that upfront.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that if you alert clients to the expectation that, you know, you need to have a contingency in your budget that's healthy and that things may change and evolve, more often than not, it isn't such a huge modification to our contract and our work. It's a huge modification to the construction budget. And so it's the clients tend to be really, you know, sensitive to that, obviously. But as long as you kind of have the upfront discussion of like, this is a challenging project. We don't, you know, we haven't opened the walls and yet we're still getting into an agreement. Yeah. And I guess secondly would be, prior to construction, you know, if there's a way, you know, I guess one thing you could do, if there's a way to do interior demolition to expose, so, you know, certain conditions that might be unknown prior to signing a construction contract, so that you can have the opportunity to revise and then, you know, base your contract on that might be one way to deal with it.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, it was stuff that I found during construction, actually. You know, just I had to reinforce a floor, an area under the bathroom because of the tub. You know, things like that. You know, if I have to change the design, you know, I know I would have, if I was the architect, I would have to ask for additional fee. So I was just wondering, you know, on the business side, how your contract's written on the more kind of residential projects.
Yeah, it's I mean, they would be additional services for us.
Yeah.
You know, just being totally honest. The other thing I would say would be, at this scale, there's often a tendency to move through the design too quickly,
Mhm.
and or to devalue it, right?
Yeah.
And to say like, hey, you know, we just need plan. We just need, you know, we just need a permit, right?
Right. Right.
But the reality is, the more time you spend on a project, the more time an architect spends on it, the better the process is going to be. And so what you spend in, I'm making a big plug, right? I'm sorry. What you spend up front will save you money down the road, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, that doesn't seem to be something that is always, you know, appreciated, but that's the truth, you know, you know, that's our job, to catch things like you need additional structure under a tub, or, you know, or to have the expertise to be familiar enough with a foundation condition to say, hey, you know, like this could be one of 3 scenarios. You know, while we don't know what it is, we should be prepared for all of them, you know?
Right. Ooh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. If no one else has any questions, we can definitely wrap up.
My pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Congrats, and thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Let's wrap up by, again, you know, introducing myself and Michael as the co-directors of PEA. We really strive to create content for emerging professionals. We try to do about an event every month. We are in the process of launching an ARE study session. We're hoping to have our first one next week. So however you heard about this event is a good place to check for more information on new events. We spread a lot of our content on Instagram. We're AIA Philadelphia. And then we have a Facebook page as well. Philadelphia Emerging Architects, AIA Philadelphia. And then of course the AIA Philadelphia website is always a good place to check for our latest events.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. And if anyone is interested in our future events or have ideas for us or just want to talk, feel free to message through emails or the Instagram. Ross and I are happy to have conversations. More the merrier.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Guys. Take care, everybody.
Thank you again, Lauren. This was great.